So it's my honor and privilege to introduce Pastor Kris Linner. Pastor Kris is retired after working 37 years in end-of-life care as a chaplain in hospice and long-term care. Early in her career, she was a national educator for the Trinity Lutheran Compassionate Bereavement Care Program. And she told me this evening that the way that worked was they began with pregnancy and infant loss, which is what I knew her work to be, and they asked her if she would please expand that to adults. And that program began at Gunderson in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Throughout her career, Kris has provided support to grieving people through grief groups, writings, and one-to-one visits. She is the author of a children's book called My Brother Dave. I first heard about Kris when I was new to the loss and grief national scene. She was credited with doing important work with pregnancy and infant loss, as I remember it. Personally, I have been the recipient of Pastor Kris's compassionate care when my husband was a patient at Greeley Nursing Home, and she was there doing sermons and being there in her chaplaincy role. What she did not tell you is that she is a talented nature photographer, and that next week she'll be going off to Africa with a mission trip from this church, from Trinity. So welcome, Pastor Kris Linner, please.
Good evening. Can everyone hear okay? So, welcome, and I'm glad you're here. But I'm also sorry that you're here, because for you to be here means that you have had incredible pain in your life. And I just want to acknowledge your courage. There are lots and lots and lots of people that we can't even count the numbers of people who have experienced loss recently in the St. Croix Valley, and they're not here. But you had the courage to be here, and I commend you for that. Tonight we're going to talk about grief as a natural disaster of the heart. I usually talk about this as like a tornado hitting a community, but today we need to talk about it as a hurricane hitting a community. It is just devastating to think about what Florida is going through right now and all the loss those people are experiencing. But whether it is a tornado and you hear the sirens and you get in the basement, or whether it's a hurricane and you have heard the mandatory evacuation and you choose to stay, you think you're ready. But you get out of the basement, or you take the boards that are on your windows off, and you are not ready for the devastation. Because life has changed, and it's changed forever. You can't go back to the way it was. You're left picking up the pieces. We've seen those images in Florida, in North Carolina, people looking at this devastation and think, how in the world can we ever start again? How can we put this back together? That's how it is when grief hits our life. We wonder about how we can put the pieces back together. It doesn't matter if it's a divorce, if it is the death of a loved one, if it is a health concern. It's about putting pieces back together, and you just can't imagine how that's going to go. How you can pick up the pieces and go on with life. But the reality is that we can rebuild. However, if you're rebuilding a house, you could use the same floor plan, you could use the same contractor, you could even use the same foundation, but it is going to be a different house. Things can't be the same again. Indeed, you will all rebuild your lives, but it's going to look different. Life has changed, and it's changed forever. It will look different, and it won't feel the same. But you can learn to rebuild and go on with new life, a different life. So grief is a natural disaster of the heart. It is also a long process. People ask me, how long does it take to get over grief? I tell people, I can tell you exactly how long it's going to take, and they perk up, and I say, it takes a lifetime. We never get over it. We learn to live with it. It's a process of bringing the head and the heart together. Your head knows what's happened, but your heart doesn't believe it. So you do things like pick up the phone and say, I need to call Mom. And you think, oh, I can't. Or you wait for that Sunday evening to come because your son always calls you on Sunday evenings. And then the phone call doesn't come. The head and heart learn to come together a little bit more each time. It's a process of learning to live life without something. An alcoholic needs to learn to live life without the bottle. You have a death of a spouse, and you need to learn life without your spouse. You're divorced, and you need to learn life as a single person again. It's a process of finding a new normal. Like I said, we can't go back, but we can find a new normal. But all those processes take a long, long time. Grief is also chaotic change. Now, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did wonderful work about death and dying, but we have misinterpreted her work to believe that this all comes in stages and it's nice and neat. I feel this, I feel this, I feel this, and I'm good. It's done. It's not that way. It's chaotic, and that's what makes grief so scary, because we can't predict what is going to hit us when. So rather than nice straight lines, it looks a little bit more like this. Grief brings change, change brings loss, loss brings adjustment, adjustment brings work, and work brings healing. Unless we do the work of grief, we're not going to heal in our grief. And that is why you're here tonight, because you want to work to bring healing. So you have taken a big step in your presence here tonight. Grief is also the elephant in the room. It doesn't matter what the source of our grief is. People don't want to talk about it. Oftentimes, I think it's because they're afraid of their own feelings. They don't know what to say. The reality is there's nothing you can say, right? It's about just being present, about acknowledging someone's loss, to give it voice, to say, I'm sorry about the death of your husband. And don't be afraid to say the D word. We use a lot of euphemisms, but it's better to just say what it is. So it helps to just acknowledge whatever loss someone is experiencing. I'm a divorced person. I don't think anyone ever came up to me and said, I'm sorry about your divorce. You know, it just went unacknowledged. So, elephant in the room. There's an elephant in the room. It's large, and squatting, so it's hard to get around it. Yet we squeeze by with "how are you" and 1,000 other forms of trivial chatter. We talk about everything else except the elephant in the room. There's an elephant in the room. We all know it's there. We're thinking about the elephant as we talk together. It's constantly on our minds. For you see, it's a very big elephant. It has hurt us all. But we don't talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, please say Barbara again. Oh, please, let's talk about her death. For if we talk about her death, then perhaps we can talk about her life. Can I say Barbara to you and not have you look away? For if I cannot, then you're leaving me alone in a room with an elephant. Just a little story about talking about the elephant in the room. Stillwater's my hometown. I moved back here after I'd been away 20 years. I was at Pioneer Park with my daughters, and there was a woman there that looked just like a high school classmate of mine. And I went up to her and I said, "Are you Mary's sister?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "I am very sorry to hear about her suicide." And then we started to talk about Mary, the memories that I had. We talked about what this was like for her sister, and had a great conversation. And she said to me, "Thank you. No one ever comes up to me. In fact, when they see me, they go the opposite direction." Great end of that story, because it was just a beginning. We bought a house, and guess who lived right next door? Mary's sister. So it was the start of now another friendship. Talk about the elephant. And that's one of the things that you're here to do tonight, is to talk about the elephant. Grief is also raw pain. Now, this quote that I'm going to read from Nicholas Wolterstorff, Lament for a Son, is about death. But whatever your grief is, you can just imagine your own rawness as I read this. There's a hole in the world now. In the place where he was, there's now just nothing. Only a gap remains. Only a void is left. There's nobody now who remembers what he remembers, loves what he loved. A person, an irreplaceable person, is gone. The world is emptier. My son is gone. Only a hole remains, a void, a gap, never to be filled. It's the neverness that is so painful. Never again to be here with us, never to sit at table with us, never to travel with us, never to laugh with us, never to cry with us, never to embrace us as he leaves for school, never to see his brothers and sisters marry. All the rest of our lives, we must live without him. Only our death can stop the pain of his death. A month, a year, 5 years. With that, I could live, but not this foreverness. One small misstep, and now this endless neverness. That is the raw pain of grief. He says it well. It's the emptiness. It's not having them here on earth, to not be able to feel their touch, to hear their laugh, to see their smile. I highly recommend the book, although it's written about the death of a son. I think it can apply to any grief. It really is a book that has spoke to me, because I had a brother die at about the same age that Nicholas Wolterstorff's son died, and it is a powerful book. Grief is all-consuming. And because it's all-consuming, it is exhausting. People say to me, I'm so tired. But the reason that we're tired is that it is all-consuming. We're thinking about it even when we don't know we're thinking about it. It consumes our emotions. And there are a whole slug of emotions. We could sit here all night and name emotions related to loss. It consumes our thoughts. Our brains kind of turn to mush when we're grieving. We can't think straight. And a lot of people will say, man, I think I'm getting Alzheimer's or getting dementia. No, you just got grief because you can't keep it all straight. And it's because our mind is working on it 24/7. And it consumes our energy. Grief is the hardest work that you will ever do. And that is why you're tired. You could have a great night's sleep and you wake up and you think, didn't I sleep at all? I remember after my brother died, I learned that I was doing grief work all the time because I got the call about his death at 2 a.m. And every night after that for about 6 months, I woke up at 2 a.m. How does that happen? Except that the psyche is doing grief work even when we're sleeping. Grief impacts every area of our life. It impacts us emotionally. And the scary thing about emotions is we don't know what emotion's going to hit us when. So sometimes it's even scary to get out of the house because you're afraid that you're going to lose it when you're in the grocery store. It impacts us financially. I think this is particularly true if one's younger, go through a divorce, your spouse dies, and how am I going to make it financially? Intellectually, I talked a little bit about that. It's hard to concentrate. It's hard to stay organized. I was losing stuff. That is just our head thinking about it. I was doing a grief group in St. Paul yesterday, and one woman said that how she is processing her grief is not so much through emotions, but thinking through it. There are people that are going to think through their grief or actually work physically through their grief, and there's some people that are going to emote their grief. If you're not an emoter, that's okay. But we just have to figure out then how you're going to work it out. There's one theory on grief that talks about intuitive grievers and instrumental grievers. Intuitive grievers are more the people that process with emotions, talk about emotions, how they're feeling. And an instrumental griever are the people that work it out. Now, when I was a chaplain down in rural La Crosse, I would go to see these old Norwegian guys, farmers, and they would not sit down and have a cup of coffee with me like the women would and talk about their grief. I would follow them out to the barn, and they would be shoveling their shit a lot harder. They were working out their grief. That's how you do it when you're a Norwegian down in La Crosse. Yeah, sure, you betcha, Yeah. So physically, they were physically working out their grief. But everyone carries their grief physically a little bit differently. Some people it's tension in the neck. Some people it's headaches. Some people it's a gut. Some it's a tightness in the chest. Everyone carries their grief physically in a different way. Spiritually. Now, spirituality is not connected to religion. In my mind, spirituality is what brings you joy, what gives you hope, what brings meaning, and who or what are you connected to. And that can all change. I will just, because I've been a pastor for 37 years, I'll just tell you a little story about myself. When I was, my spirituality changed when I was grieving, and it was a little bit tough, because this is what happened. I was working in a nursing home when my brother died, and 36 years old, died in a plane crash, just like this. And I'd always prayed for the love and safety of my family, and now I'm working in a nursing home, and I would say to people, what would you like me to pray for today? Pray that I die. Okay, this is making no sense to me. And so God and I didn't talk for a long time. There was no more praying for me to God. It's a little bit of a problem for a pastor. Now, on Sunday morning, I could do it if I had the prayers written out and I would just read them, I was just going through the motions. But it took me a long time to kind of come back to a spirituality that was comfortable for me. So our spirituality can change. Some people, it enhances their spirituality. Some people, it diminishes their spirituality. It can change. Our grief impacts that. It certainly impacts us socially. The way I think about that is, someone who's divorced or someone who has experienced the death of a spouse will tell you that we live in a couples culture, and you feel like the odd one out. So that's just one way that it impacts us socially. And grief is different for everyone. So sometimes that can cause a little bit of problem in a family because everyone's grieving a different way, because everyone had a different relationship with the person, right? And they bring their own personalities to it. So some factors that may influence grief. Individual's personality. If you're an easygoing person, you're going to bring that to your grief. But if you're a highly anxious person, you're going to bring that to your grief. So who we are as individuals impacts how we're going to grieve. Available support systems, but I always add to that, and our ability to use them. I could have a wonderful support system, but if I can't use it because I'm too stoic, or I'm too proud, or I'm embarrassed, then it's not going to do me any good. So we have to be able to draw on that support systems that we have, formal or informal. Coping mechanisms of the past. So if I have dealt with problems in my life by drinking, what's going to happen when I experience loss? More drinking. Or if I'm a stress eater, and that is how I deal with coping, what's going to happen? More eating. So whether you have healthy coping mechanisms or unhealthy coping mechanisms, we go back to what's worked for us in the past. Cultural and spiritual background. Sometimes some of the messages that we get from our culture, whether that is our stoic Scandinavian culture, I can pick on them because I am one, or an example for spiritual, I hear oftentimes people will say, well, I just need to be happy because he or she is in heaven. Well, that doesn't really help our grief. Because as Nicholas Wolterstorff said, our grief is about not having them here, you know? And so sometimes people's spirituality will tell them that they can't grieve because they have to be happy. Social expectations of the griever. That instrumental and intuitive grievers, oftentimes we might kind of think of the men as more instrumental, the women more intuitive. But you know, we can be both. And some women are intuitive and some are instrumental. But I think there are some social expectations of how masculine and feminine responses to grief. So, for example, one example, men are told, don't cry from a young age oftentimes. So that can impact how people grieve. The nature of the relationship, if it was enmeshed, that's going to cause problems in grief. If it was distance, that's going to cause another set of issues in grief. Family of origin. Just tell a quick story about how family of origin can impact grief. My dad had 2 brothers. They were 8 and 10. They were playing on the St. Croix River in the wintertime. They fell through the ice. One died and one was saved. The family rule was we don't talk about Billy. Howard, when he was 16 years old, ran away and never came back. My grandma got a message about his death when he was 72. That is how strong messages of family origin can be. So think about what you learned from your family of origin about loss and how that might be impacting your experience with loss now. Some normal reactions to grief. Grief makes us feel crazy. And if we kind of know some things that are normal about grief, it helps us feel not so crazy. Having difficulty concentrating. I've been talking about that a little bit. Can't stay focused. Feeling sad or depressed. Just want to give you a visual image of the difference between sadness that comes with grief and clinical depression. Sadness that comes with grief and depression that comes with grief is like this. It's a roller coaster. It's up and down, up and down. Bad, bad, bad day, better day. Really bad day. Okay, we're okay for a long time here. Better, better, bad. Clinical depression is spiral. Bad day, bad day, bad day, bad day, bad day, bad day. So, if you feel yourself starting to spiral, that is an indication that you want to get more help because you might need medication. But for the most part, grief doesn't need medication. Sadness and depression are a normal part of grief. Feeling frustrated and misunderstood. There was a Midwest newspaper back in the 1990s that asked people, how long does it take to get over the death of a loved one? Guess what the average response was? A year? Nope. 3 months? Nope. 4 months? Nope. 2 weeks. Okay, so no wonder we feel frustrated and misunderstood because people think, get over it. You know, you should be back to normal. Think about this. A truck driver that experienced the death of his wife has to be back on the job after 3 days of bereavement leave. How many of you have been driving your car and you end up 5 exits past where you were supposed to turn off? That's just a normal part of grief. But that's downright dangerous when we have truckers on the road that can't concentrate because it's only been less than a week. Like I said earlier, I can tell you how long it takes. It takes a lifetime. But people don't understand that, especially if they haven't been through it. And they think that, the funeral's over and you should be back to normal. We all know that's crazy. Experiencing anxiety. It's like one shoe has dropped and we're just waiting for the next one to drop. Anyone experience that? It's like, the phone rings and you think, oh, more bad news. Normal part of grief. Feeling ambivalent. We don't know how to feel. Too many emotions coming at once or conflicting emotions. We feel relieved, but then we feel guilty because we're relieved. Experiencing obsessive ruminating. It is like when you lose your car keys. Women, we dump out our purse, put everything back in. Where are the car keys? Go and dump out the purse again, It's like we just get stuck in a track. And maybe that obsessive ruminating is, what if I would have done this? Or what if I would have said this? What if I would have called the ambulance earlier? We go over those things in our mind over and over. Normal part of grief. Changes in sleeping habits. You're sleeping too much. You're not sleeping enough. Feeling like you want to escape. Suicide ideation is a normal part of grief. And it sounds like this. I just wish that I wouldn't wake up in the morning because you don't want to face another day without your loved one. But we need to be aware that if we are not just saying that, but saying, I think maybe I'll start to save up those pills that the doctor gave me, then we need to be concerned. If we're just thinking about, I don't know how to do life without him. That's normal part of grief. But I don't know how to do life without him, and I'm not going to. That is cause for concern, and you need to get help. All right, we're going to whip through this pretty fast because it's nearly time for group. Take care of yourself. I cannot tell you how to take care of yourself because my list would not work for you. So what you need is self-awareness to know what you need to take care of yourself. Remember, you need to feel it in order to heal it. That doesn't mean that you have to be a crier, but it does mean that you need to express your grief in some way. Maybe you journal it. Maybe you garden. Maybe you're an obsessive cleaner and doing housework. So let those feelings out, however that is for you. Expect the intensity of your grief to vary. It's a roller coaster. Tell the story and find safe people to tell the story. Recognize that you're not the same person as before. Know that there are no shortcuts through grief. The only way through grief is to go through it. It's like you have to walk through the valley to get to the mountain. Be open to help. We can ask for help, but we need to be open to receiving it. Be open to help. If I could add one commandment to the 10 that we were given, it'd be this: thou shalt not should on thyself. And there are a lot of shoulds when it comes to grief. I shouldn't cry so much. I should be over this. I should be able to handle this. Let go of the shoulds. Let go of the shoulds. Okay, be patient with yourself. This is a long process, Plan ahead for grief triggers, anniversary dates, birthdays. That's going to intensify your grief. So have a plan and then be flexible for the plan, because the example I use, say you're going to go to a Christmas party with a coworker and you think, yeah, I can do that. She's picking you up in 15 minutes and you think, no way. I do not want to be around a bunch of people that are drinking and talking badly about their spouses when I don't have a spouse. So you say, forget it. Call her up. I can't do it. You have a plan, but you need to be flexible because you don't know how you're going to feel in the moment. And just know that you are not crazy. You're grieving. You're grieving. It's not craziness. It's grief. A few more things. When to seek help for yourself. If grief interferes with your ability to care for yourself, if you're finding that you're not eating, if you haven't showered in a week and a half, it's time to think about getting some help. If you have difficulty with significant relationships that you did not have difficulty with before. So if all of a sudden you find that you cannot talk with your daughter without getting in a fight, that would be a red flag that you might want to get some help. If you have intense feelings of guilt or anger, those are two emotions that can really get us stuck in grief. If you're avoiding emotions, whether that is becoming a workaholic, medicating them, if increased use of alcohol or other drugs, unresolved grief from previous loss. Grief calls out to grief, and if you haven't done grief work from a previous loss, you're going to have to go back and work on that before you can work on your current loss. If you're unable to use support system, and certainly if you're feeling suicidal. Those are just some references. Any thoughts, comments? All right, we're going to let you discuss it in your groups. So